Welcome. So we're entering into Purim, and we're going to do another Purim lesson. This one's a little different. This is Purim, the 2,000-year code. So during Purim, we're going to see that the Bible, as I've taught before, has many codes in it. One of the problems you have if you're coming from the Christian church is we just look at the Bible and we read it face value, literally, as what it says, and you just look at it and you take it from there, and you're also reading it with your Western, modern, Hellenistic Greek thought. The Bible is a spiritual book, and we tend to just look at it as do's and don'ts, good and bad, do good, go to hell, the end. There's a whole lot more to that. The Bible has a lot more going on to it. There's a lot of codes, there's a lot of hidden things, there's a lot of wordplay, there's much deeper layers of what you're just reading. Reading has its place and its importance as the literal, but in Judaism, any real studied Jew in the Orthodox, we know that everything is a deeper meaning. It's not just a plain on what you're reading. So with that, we'll have fun with Esther and the 2,000 years prophecy. So we know that Esther and Mordecai are prophets, and we're told that Queen Esther actually had to request with the Great Council when they were putting together or canonizing the Old Testament that her story be added and remembered. So with the hidden codes within inside of Esther, we're going to have to go backtrack and start from the beginning. So in the beginning, we start with Jacob and Esau. Esau was always against Jacob. There was always conflict. Esau wanted to kill Jacob. Esau tried to stop Jacob from coming back into the land of Israel after being gone for 22 years. We see there's very differences in their observance towards their view on Torah. Esau would go off and marry one of Ishmael's daughters amongst many other women that he married. And he would settle in a land called Edom. One of Esau's grandsons would become Amalek. So the first encounter that we have as a problem with the Amalekites is when Moses is leading Israel into the promised land, leading them the Jews to Israel after receiving the Torah from Mount Sinai. And then the Amalekites come and attack Israel out of nowhere, simply just because they've heard of all the great things the Jews were doing after leaving Egypt and what they did to the Egyptian Empire. They wanted to come fight them and stop them. So the Zohar teaches that Amalek exists only to fight the Jewish nation and to stop any holiness from being spread throughout the world. So the problem here now really begins in 1 Samuel with Saul. Samuel instructs King Saul to kill all of the Amalekites and all of their livestock. But Saul goes against Samuel and against God's instructions, and he keeps King Agag alive as a slave and imprisons him, and he keeps all the best of his livestock, brings them all back and parades them all around. Well, somehow while Agag is in prison, he gets a conjugal visit, and through that, Agag ends up having a son. This son would go on and continue the seed. So 400 years later, we jump. This is 70 years after exile. We end up in the megillah of Queen Esther. And this is where we meet the famous villain Haman. Haman, who basically the entire festival ends up revolving around. Haman is Haman the Amalekite, and he's promoted to the court of King Xerxes. King Xerxes is the king of Persia at the time. Haman, being a direct descendant of King Agag, wants simply nothing more than to destroy all the Jews for the annihilation of his people years ago. So this is the result in ignoring the prophets and going against God's command. Samuel gives King Saul God's directions, and out of his disobedience, a story of Queen Esther unfolds. So without going through the story of Esther, you can check the whole other videos on Purim about Esther. We're going to jump 2,000 years, over 2,000 years, to modern times, to the 20th century, which we're now in the 21st century, but anyways. This is the beginning of the Zionist movement. This is where the Jews who were scattered all amongst the world begin returning or wanting to return and start settling in Israel. So we have the Balfour Declaration, which is issued by the British government during the First World War. This is support of resettling the Jews into the promised land of Israel. This would go off to birth Adolf Hitler in World War II and set Israel back into conflict with Haman and Amalek. We're looking into the Talmud sources where Jacob asks the Lord not to let Esau go off to have the desires of his heart. Esau is in Edom, and this is said to be about Germania, Edom. Jacob asked for God not to let this nation loose, for it would destroy the world. There's quite a few other Talmudic passages, and even the sages dealing with Edom and the place called Germania. I have whole other teachings on here about Edom being related to Rome. So this place called Germania is not a united kingdom. It's made up of 300 individual providences and 300 individual crown princes that rule over them. Germany, being the descendants of Amalek, you can see the other teachings on Hamas, that Germany itself did not become a unified nation until 1870. Before this, Germany, which is Dutchland, was broken up into 300 individual states. So on a side note, we have Rashi, who teaches that Germania is a part of Edom, and we have other commentaries that say that this is likely refers to Ashkenazi. So Germany breaks all of its allegiances from the rest of the world, yet befriends Rome. Hitler wants Berlin to be the new capital of the new world, and he wants to call it Germania. And his dream is for Germania to rival Babylon or the Roman Empire. Hitler would actually ban the reading of the Book of Esther in Germany. Hitler would then go on to relate the same sentiments as Haman during a radio broadcast on January 30th in 1944, where he stated that if Nazi Germany was defeated, it would result in the Jewish celebration of the destruction of Europe in a second triumphant Purim Fest. So let's look at Purim Fest, 1946, the Nuremberg trials. Haman has the king set a decree to kill all the Jews throughout the land. After King Xerxes finds out that Esther is a Jew, she convinces him to stop the killing. So the king issues a decree that the Jewish people can get to defend themselves. So now with the Jews being victorious against Haman and his soldiers, the very gallows that Haman built for Mordecai who openly stood up against Haman, is where we find Haman having himself hung from the exact same gallows. And Queen Esther, unlike King Saul, requests King Xerxes that all 10 of Haman's sons be hung and executed on gallows as well. Therefore, they wouldn't seek retribution against the kingdom. So Esther persuades the king to have Haman and all 10 sons all executed in public. So with the final execution day, with the queen being victorious, King Xerxes tells Esther that he would grant her any wish that she would have. Esther's response was, if it pleases the king, let it be granted today that the Jews do tomorrow also as this day. That's in Megillah 9:14. So Esther's request is strange. Haman and his sons are already hung. They're already dead. How can this be repeated again tomorrow? The Midrash Tahum Bo 13, there is a tomorrow that is now, and a tomorrow which is later, a prophecy for the future. In the Megillah of Esther, the queen lists 2 columns with the names of the 10 sons, up and down, 2 separate columns, left and right, and up and down. This is nowhere found anywhere else in the entire Torah. The listing of the 10 names of Haman's sons have 3 letters which are written in a much smaller font than all the other letters. These letters are a Tav, a Shin, and a Zayin. And there's also a 4th letter which is in a much larger font. This occurs 22 times throughout the Torah. The book of Esther happens to contain 4 of them in just one book. Now, another side note, anyone who knows about writing Torah and the Torah scrolls, the Torah has to be copied exact to every little smudge, dot, and tittle. Otherwise, it's disqualified. So the sages know that the Bible is nothing but a book of codes. So any change out of normal indicates there's something deeper going on here. This happens also, this happens with numbers, this happens with spelling of words or certain words that they have 2 words that mean the same meaning, and sometimes they use a different word out of normal instead of the normal word they would use, or sometimes it's the right word but then you would use the abnormal word. And so there's all these little codes and hidden things in there the sages have discovered over the years. So we see in this style that the words, the names are wrote in these 2 columns, as I mentioned. There's 1 column with the names, and there's a 2nd column which just uses the Hebrew word and. So it says Jimmy and, Thomas and, Billy and it gives us 2 sets of columns, 10 and 10. Now, some of the sages have looked at this and they say that this is actually a pictograph of gallows, and it's 2 sets of gallows. So there's a set of 10 and a set of 10. The 3 small letters, the Tav, the Shin, and a Zayin, have a numerical equivalent, which is Jewish gematria, of 707. Shin is 300, Tav is 400, and a Zayin is 7. This gives us 707. We have a larger letter, the oversized Vav, in the last name of one of Haman's sons. So it would be Rav Mikhail Ber Weissmandel. He was a Tzaddik during the Holocaust that saved thousands of people's lives. He's the one who would go on to discover this. He discovered that the Vav, the large Vav, represents the 6th millennial, as where the 3 smaller letters, the 707, represent the year. So Hebrew doesn't use the thousands or the millennial. It just uses the year 707, 5707, the 2707. They assume that the millennial, the thousand, which one you're in, so it's just assumed. So anyways, 707 with the large Vav being the millennial gives us a total of 5707. We're in the year 5785 in the Hebrew calendar, so that would just be 785. But anyway, in the Esther code 5707 corresponds with the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we use, to the year 1946. That's the year of the Nuremberg trials. Now back to the columns. We have two sets of columns of 10, and we only have Haman and 10 sons. It's only one set. The Nuremberg trials of the Nazi war criminals from November 20th, 1945 to October 1946, 11 Nazi leaders were found guilty and sentenced to public hanging. Now this, you got to remember, is a military tribunal, and the actual recommendations for execution would have been a firing squad, yet they chose public hanging. 11 men are chose to be executed and hung, but before the hanging takes place, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring would commit suicide by taking a cyanide capsule in his cell. This leaves 10 Nazis. Interestingly, or coincidentally, Haman has 11 children. One of them commits suicide, leaving Haman with 10. The one that commits suicide was Haman's daughter. This leaves Haman 10 sons. Fun fact, later on, throughout history, we would learn that Göring was a transvestite or a crossdresser. This is making him Haman's daughter. And this, the book of the Megillah of Esther, isn't the only place that we find the importance of this warning. In the Davarim, or the book of Deuteronomy, the books of Moses, when Moses is foretelling the Jewish people that they're going to forsake the law of God, and then he's warning them that they're going to go into exile, during his speech, he's speaking from God, and he speaks to Israel and says, "Of that day, I will hide my face from them. They will be plagued by many evils and distressed." The saying, "I will hide my face from them," has the Jewish gematria value, spelling, "This is Haman." This is pointing to Esther and pointing to the Holocaust. There are a number of hints of Purim found within the entirety of the Torah. So if you think that's interesting, we'll wrap it up with you can look at my teachings on Purim and Yom Kippur and how they both connect, being the pure, obviously. This wraps it all up and ties it all together, and I'll conclude this way. The executions of October 16th, 1946 fell on the 21st of Tishri. This is the day in which God seals the verdicts that he declared on Rosh Hashanah. As the Megillah of Esther recounts, a decree that the king has sealed cannot be rescinded, and therefore Xerxes, king, had to promulgate a second decree to allow the Jewish people to defend themselves. So the lesson is that the first decree was never nullified. That's something Christians need to think on, that last statement there.